Good morning, still. So there's going to be, I'm going to have some slides that may have, that do talk about issues you've heard about already, but most of them hopefully don't. Okay, so just to go over the context, for FDA approval for any drug or any device, safe and effective means that the benefits outweigh the risks for most patients. And the caveats generally are, if prescribed for the approved use, that specific indication, if used as directed, and as you've already heard, they are almost always, whether it's opioids or anything else, they're usually studied for relatively a short term. So when you look at approval of opioids specifically, if doctors are prescribing them inappropriately, the question is that irrelevant to the FDA approval decision, since FDA is a public health agency? Shouldn't they care about that? But the FDA doesn't interfere with the practice of medicine, and that's a long-standing issue. And if patients abuse a drug, is that FDA's responsibility? You've heard a little bit about some of the efforts FDA has tried, such as requiring training for doctors. Other things that have been used for other products are requiring an informed consent booklet that the company makes for their product, and that the FDA works with them to make sure it includes information that it should have. So it's different from a label because it's specifically for patients. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the descriptions of different products, because they have PR value, and sometimes that PR value conflicts with the public health interest. So the term abuse deterrent sounded logical, but it's often misinterpreted to mean addiction deterrent, and it's not the same thing. And yet 46% of physicians in a study that was done misunderstand that meaning. Again, if the product is crush resistant, that's crush resistant. Just call it crush resistant. Why call it an abuse deterrent? Tamper resistant, this is something we all deal with for many different bottles of medication. But again, in this case, let's make sure it really works. So if something's called tamper resistant, let's have studies to prove that it actually reduces tampering. And then a final issue on all of these things is that when post-market studies are required, that the FDA enforce that they actually be done, and be done in a timely manner. And this is something that, whether you're talking about opioids or any other product, is a long-standing problem. And there are probably some people in the audience have done the research about how long it can take for these post-market studies to be done, often about 10 years. They're not started in a timely manner, they're not completed in a timely manner, and sometimes they're not completed as they were supposed to be done, because let's face it, what's the incentive? Once the product is on the market, the company has very little incentive to start a study quickly that might result in labels that restrict marketing. They have very little incentive to do a study that might show their product isn't as effective as they thought it was. And they have very little incentive to complete a study that might show it's not as safe as it was supposed to be. I'm going to give one example of a meeting that was almost a year ago that our center did have, one of our staff did speak at this. This is a product that shall remain nameless. The study was, traditionally FDA studies have been required to have 2 pivotal clinical trials, but more and more in recent years, FDA has approved products based on just 1 study, which, as scientists, replication is the keystone of science, and it's unfortunate when there's only 1. So in this particular case, the application was based on a single 6-month controlled trial with some substantial design flaws, which we pointed out during the public comment period of this advisory committee meeting. So, for example, the patients that were required, so this was going to a implanted opioid. And the idea of an implant is You can't sell it. You can't change the dosage. It would be a steady dosage. It would be implanted in the arm, and you can't just take it out, presumably, and sell it. So that seems like an advantage. But you had to transition people from the drug that they were already taking, which in this case was the same drug but not in implanted form, and you had to transition them to this implant. And during that period, before the dose got really regular from the implant, they had to use sometimes the drug in a supplemental way. And they found that some patients had a rather significant amount of supplemental drug during this transition period. And we thought that those patients should have been categorized as non-responders in the study, but they weren't. Also, there were patients who received this implant who discontinued the study without providing, and did not stay in the study long enough to provide efficacy data, but those were excluded from the analysis, which changed, which is a bias that was introduced. Then you had, this one was my favorite, you had patients who were missing their urine drug tests, but those were considered negative. And I think most people know that when people don't do their urine tests, there's a really good chance that there's a reason that they don't want to be found that they were positive. So they should have been counted as positive, but instead they were counted as negative. And then this is an issue that happens all the time. 84% of the patients were white. Obviously, there's a diverse population using these products, and yet they were not included in the study in large enough numbers to see how well it worked specifically for whites versus different groups. So, of course, the decision was, let's approve this drug, and FDA did approve this implant. So despite these specific concerns, what we were talking about in our comment was not that this was a bad product, but that the studies weren't done very well, and we felt it needed more, the analysis needed to be corrected, maybe the study needed to be improved and extended, but instead the implant was approved. You've heard a little bit about REMS, the risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. Again, this is a process that's used at FDA for many, many different products. And I was actually involved in when the legislation was first passed that created the REMS. We always had some concerns about it, but I can tell you it was a bipartisan effort coming out of the Senate. And we were told, it's really important that certain drugs that do have safety issues still be available, and we can mitigate those safety concerns by doing specific things that FDA feels comfortable doing that would not really interfere with the practice of medicine. And this way we can get products on the market that would otherwise be considered too risky. And certainly opioids would certainly fit into that category. But I think originally one of the focus was something like Accutane, which was a acne medication that works well on acne, but if a girl is pregnant or becomes pregnant, it causes severe birth defects. So, that seemed like a logical way to deal with that. But what's happened is, according to a study that was released at a meeting that the FDA had a few months ago, 20% of long-acting opioid prescribers, only 20% actually complete the REMS training for doctors. It's a voluntary training, so only 20% are completing it. By the way, only 59% of prescribers were even aware that the training was available, according to this analysis that was done for the FDA. And I just let's look at what happens to the ones who do take it, do this training. So we looked at the data that were available, and there are a lot of different questions, obviously, that were asked to see how well the doctors who were trained understood what they were being taught. And I'm just going to give a few examples, but you can see that there are quite a few things. The dark blue color is the correct answers. So less than half answered this correctly. This seemed like an important question of how to convert patients to an extended release opioid. Here's another one, the family history of mental illness, 29% got that correct. Here's one about federal limits, 31% got that correct. And here's another one about comprehensive physical exams, 47% got that correct. And then something about prescribing, systematically having drug screening, and 19% got that correct. So you have a very small percentage of physicians taking this training. It's voluntary. Actually, a fairly large percentage, about half who start it don't finish it. And then even if they take it, there are quite a few things that they aren't learning. So our concern, obviously, is that if you have a very dangerous product that you've heard ad nauseum about how many people are dying, and you are trying to deal with it through a REMS framework that's a voluntary physician training. I mean, this is only part of it, but doesn't seem to be working very well. So the not many doctors are participating, and the ones that aren't learning everything that you would want them to learn. So, just in summary, I guess I would just say that, our concerns is that generally opioids have been treated like other drugs by the FDA. And because the risks are so much greater, it has to be treated in somewhat of a different way. And you've heard a lot about that and the balance of trying to make sure that the drugs are available to those who need them and make sure we know who they are and whether they're actually working, and using standards that make more sense for trying to not just get them available to those who need them, make them less available to those that don't. And I guess I will just add, probably everybody in this room has had this experience of getting a prescription for an opioid you never asked for and didn't need. I personally not only got a prescription before I had hip surgery, but I was told, be sure to fill this prescription because once you've had the surgery, you're not going to be able to. So be sure to fill it so that you have it in case you need it. I didn't need it. But I had this prescription in my house. I had kids that might have wanted to look at it and maybe borrow it or maybe share it. But nobody asked me any of those questions. I didn't know how to dispose of it carefully, so it just, sat in my medicine cabinet for a while before I finally did dispose of it carefully. But, that's just one example, and I'll just give another that some of you might have had this experience. When my dad went into hospice, the next thing I knew, they sent a whole lot of drug to him in case he'd need it. By the way, he never did. And this was hanging around at the assisted living facility where he was, where anybody could take it if they wanted to. So, there are so many ways that we need to do a better job. FDA is just part of the picture, but I think we need to figure out, how our federal agencies can do a better job, as well as, how we can do a better job of training physicians. Thank you.